All right, welcome to another edition of our subseasonal forecast contest. Today's May 19th, forecasting CDDs again. And Michael Gruen, a recent graduate of Rutgers, is going to drive our forecast discussion today. So without further ado, over to Michael.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, so as always, I feel like we'll go to the attribution. So verification was 22.2, which was actually below the 30-year normal, where looks like most of our forecasts for that week were calling for colder than the 30-year normal. So a little bit warmer than than most of us expected, except for Dr. Roundy. He was pretty close as it seems he's been the past few weeks. Take a look at the Dynacast. I guess we can do HDDs. So looks like it was actually pretty. I don't know what the maps looked like for this time period. We can look at the um, Maxar forecast in a minute. But it looks like most of the cold was over in the northern tiers of the country, with some warmth in the central parts, mainly centered in the west. And let's take a look at. Is this what I want? Info reports? Yeah. So this would have been.
I think it's April 28th. Yeah,
April.
this is our last HDD forecast, right?
See what this looks like. Okay, so this is a bit different than. It looks like they were expecting a lot more trothiness in the east and a lot more ridging in the west, but it looks like there was more of a, I guess, a muted zonal flow. I'll take a look at yes, do this one. Departure. Yeah, it looks like even a little bit of ridging started to build back into the east. The trough lifted to the north. I guess they expected it to stay a bit further south based off of this map. Although the EC looks to actually, this is basically almost a carbon copy forecast. The EC. Looks like the CFS, as usual, doesn't provide any type of information here, other than Canada being warm. But what am I supposed to do with that information? Although looks like a lot of troughing coming into the west coast. Let's see if this looks different. I guess shift period should work. Yeah, you can see the big difference in the two periods. This huge trough in the east, shifting over to actual shifting over to ridging. It's pretty big change in the forecast. Might even argue that could be a pattern change in the works. There's also appears to be some huge ridging building over, what is that, Siberia? I think that in the winter, I know that that can lead to polar vortex disruptions, but I don't know what it does um, in May. So if anyone has any thoughts on that, feel free to share. So that's all I got for this one. Most people did reasonably well, except for MJO analog and some of the moving averages. And I guess Dr. Decker, I don't want to pick on him because he's not here, but he didn't do too hot. But I mean, he was only off by, what is that, 4 HDDs, so that's not, I mean, considering the spread, that's not too bad. But anyone else have anything they want to add or comment, complain?
Uh, I mean, I was a little disappointed to see my score since I was actually a little warmer than the 30 year, but since I had a larger sigma, so that got penalized. But given the tiny differences and the large difference in results, I think my spread was justified, although it hit my score a little. Also, looks like we have a classic case of the gradient running just north of Chicago and just south of New York's, where New York ends up being near the 30 year, while Chicago ends up being a little warm, and that likely played into what the HDDs did.
Yeah, yeah. It looks like Chicago was just on the edge, just got pushed in there. Looks like if I had to venture a guess, I'd say that the pattern that everyone, I think myself included, was expecting kind of moved a little faster than we expected. Especially, not to pick on Maxar because they're not here, can't really defend themselves, but this pattern definitely did not materialize. So, um, so it seems that the pattern everyone was expecting, and then I think the flip, because and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we were expecting a flip to warmer sometime either during that week or maybe it was the next week. So like Monday, maybe the 18th, we were expecting a flip to warmer, and we got there a bit earlier. So I guess that I'm guessing had something to do with it. All right. So if
Uh,
anybody has any,
yeah, I was just going to say, Michael, real quick, if going back to the ECCFS that you had up there for a second on the
yeah.
report, getting into the details. If I was going to channel my inner Steve Bennett here in terms of some of the stuff that he said in the past, if I look at the patterns, I could at least, this is just subjective, but I can rationalize, well, the EC, you know, there was definitely cold in the east to work with. It was just a flatter flow. Like, we didn't look at the 500 millbar heights, but maybe the 500 millbar height pattern came in a little flatter. Right. And you get to that, like right what you have there. But on the flip side, and the only point I was really just trying to make is with the the CFS, you can't even justify that, right? The CFS like had warmth up across the north and cool in the south. So I don't know, I don't know exactly, and not that we have to spend time on this, but how you get from what the EC showed to what actually verified. I mean, it's like almost a 180 with the cold in the north and the warmth in the south. And I'm just, I guess, echoing your point about, uh, I'm not sure how much value the CFS has, certainly during this forecast and on a consistent basis. Like, is it just, kind of like a broken clock type thing? I was thinking one other thing you could do if you'd like, Michael, since this is I think this is the last forecast of the heating season. If you want to take a quick peek at heating season 1920, yeah, just
Oh yeah,
kind of
yeah, 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 yeah.
see how things looked.
All right, let's see who did the best with the. So it looks like with an insignificant, well, not I don't know if insignificant is the right word, but you guys know what I mean. Number of forecasts, Matt Rogers did the best. So congrats to him on his 3 forecasts. They were all pretty good. um, other than that, looks like oops, looks like Phil was our HDD winner. Came in with a score of minus 2.2, so that's pretty good. Directional correctness could have been a little higher, but still. And let's see, second place, our ailing Zach came in second place with a score of 6.9, and then the rest of us were below 10, so they don't count. um, let's see who was the most directionally correct. Let's see if Dr. Decker. Oh, no, he looks like Dr. Roundy was the most directionally correct with a wow essentially 68% of the time he was directionally correct. So if anything, is to be taken from this. Listen to Dr. Roundy, and whatever side of warm or cold he's on, just go with him, because he'll probably be right 2/3 of the time. Let's see. The CFS, of course, was less than a coin flip, worst directionally correct, with a significant number of forecasts. And let's see who was best performance based off a consensus. With an insignificant number of forecasts, Preston Page with one forecast. Congratulations for having one correct forecast. And looks like Phil again was the most was our best scorer, with no surprise Zach coming in at second place, and then everybody else. Of course, the CFS dead last. No surprise there again. I think I don't know how hard or easy this would be, or exactly how to go about doing this. But if there's some way we could get like an anti-CFS, just to, like, whatever the CFS says, this thing does the opposite. Because I think it'd be a pretty good forecast most of the time. I mean, 60% of the time correct is better than well, it's better than you and me anyway. So can't be that bad. But all right. Does anyone want to see anything else? I can go into the sandbox and we can look at a whole bunch of other fun and
Can you
strange things.
the directionally correct one more time, please?
Oh yeah, sure.
I was just going to say that, yeah, I mean, well, first of all, kudos to the good performers here. I see Industry and Dr. Lupo are up there too. From a research perspective, I think one of the questions that hopefully we can maybe look into more in the future is, we know there's no perfect or one size fits all performance metric, right? That's why we have a couple different ones here. And it's really fascinating, right? Like, Philip, you're on the line here, and it is fascinating. If we have a little more time,
Yes.
to kind of look through what's going on there. I'm guessing in part, the CRPS, which is basically our performance metric, it can be pretty harsh on forecasts that are, significantly divergent from climatology, and especially when the forecast verifies neuroclimatology. So I suspect Paul Roundy got burned on a couple. In fact, I can think, Professor Roundy obviously overall has done very well, but I think there were a couple times maybe where he was out there on a warm or cold side and it verified very differently, and that hurt him in terms of the CRPS. Whereas it looks like obviously Philip did not have too many of those, if any at all, where he was significantly divergent, or had a really harsh, or was harshly penalized in terms of the CRPS, despite the fact that directionally correct, he wasn't as strong as some of the others. But ultimately, the more fundamental, or the more applicable or practical question I want to get at is, it would be really interesting to look at this from a business sense, right? Like, whether it's natural gas prices or whatever, to say, what would have helped, what would have been the most, which forecast could you have monetized the best, right? Is it the one with the best directional correctness, i.e., Professor Roundy, or is it the one with the best CRPS score, in this case, Philip? And so I think that's sort of the next level of some things that we can think about, and where to go, because that as this exercise, right, is about trying to give a lot of our students and recent grads experience that they can use in the workforce and stuff. And so that would be I think a logical sort of next step, and one of the things we may want to explore.
Yeah, and just to give my opinion on that, I feel like directional correctness would be better for traders, since you might, if you think it's going to be cold and you say, oh, it'll be cold, say, I don't know, 10 HDDs below average, but colder than normal, and it ends up being 15. Well, you were directionally correct, but your CRPS score might not be great because of that. But you were directionally correct, and I think that means more to a trader that, okay, you said cold, and at least it was cold, rather than it was cold, but it wound up being warm. If that makes sense.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, it does. And we just got in the chat box from our friends in Missouri a mention about the bias too, and how certainly that could play a role. Yeah, if you want to do a quick filter on that. And of course, I know Mike's done some research. Michael, looking at bias correction and stuff. And so, my first thought when I see the CFS showing that's over 31 forecasts. That's a we don't. I obviously that number doesn't give you a week to week, but it certainly tells you that overall there was a distinct bias, which could suggest there that bias correction on the CFS could have at least improved the score. Um,
It's interesting that you mentioned that, Dave, because I just noticed the EC bias for this winter. This number is pretty close to the bias that it ended with last winter. I think. I can actually check here. Yeah, 6.4 versus
System.
5.6. So I mean, that's less than an HDD of bias over the course of the season. So I think that there might be some pretty consistent bias problems with both the Euro and the CFS. It's more pronounced with the CFS because the CFS is like, oh, doomsday cold coming, guys, get ready, and the Euro's kind of more measured, so we don't really pick on it as much. But I think the Euro still shows some pretty strong bias on a week to week basis. Which, since we're on the topic, I can show that later on if we have time.
What was the bias of the CFS last year too? So this year it was 12.9.
12.9 last year. Only 3.3 actually. I think there were some forecasts early on that it was super warm for during the big cold period. At least that makes sense that it was warm for the big cold period. I could look through.
Yeah.
Real quick. Let's just see. Wait. 6. Yeah, I mean, first forecast October 1st. It was off by it's like 14 on the warm side. So.
Oh, Michael,
right.
if you want to do one other thing, it's just an idea, but since we are now fully into the cooling season, if you want to look back at cooling season 2019, just real quick to see, just so people can get a refresh on at least the best performers from last year.
Yeah. Okay. So, let's see who had the most. Looks like Phil was once again one of our top performers, followed by I think that's you, Dave. And then looks like our third place is Dr. Decker, followed by Industry. So, looks like the usual suspects. Doesn't look like it doesn't look like Dr. Roundy was really participating too much in those days.
Yeah. Okay.
EC didn't do particularly well, but not that I can really say much. I got roasted on a few forecasts, didn't do too hot myself. CFS again, showing negative is a cold bias in the summer, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so still showing a similar cold bias of 11 HD CDs. So pretty consistent, aside from heating season from 2018 2019. CFS consistently just 11, 12 degree days off on average. So if anyone decides to use the CFS, factor that in and might do all right. um, let's see. Just look at performance consensus, and then I'll move on here. It looks like Phil's our winner across the board. Actually, I think it's the same few people. Actually, no, Zach with did well versus consensus. Okay. So unless anyone has anything else they'd like to add, I think I'll move on to the current week. Okay. So just gonna take a look at what we got. So Matt Rogers is our that's our warmest forecast, if I'm doing this right, with 37. EC is our coldest with 27.8. That's gonna be interesting because the CFS is warmer than the EC, so we'll see which one of these guys comes out on top there. I think this is supposed to be. Looks like we have a ghost forecaster, no name.
I
But
I think that's the group from Missouri.
yeah, I figured that because I recognize the formula, but looks like they're on above average confidence. But so without further ado, I'll volunteer to go first and do my 2-minute spiel. Okay, so my forecast was for 36 CDDs, which is slightly warmer than the 10-year of 35.7. Also increased my spread slightly to 8 from the normal spread of 7.8. Forecast formula. One change from last week is I'm now using the 10-year since that tends to do better in the cooling season. Might be a bit early, but I think it'll be fine. Looking at the CPC, this is not the CPC, so I'll do the teleconnections. NAO looks to be positive. There's a couple of members heading towards negative, but the forecast has been pretty decent recently, other than that negative dip in, I guess, around May 10th. So fairly okay with calling this a warmer signal for the east. AO looks to be positive. Again, it's been on the lower end of guidance, but not outside the range. So even the bottom of this range takes it to neutral. So either a warm signal or not really a signal at all. PNA looking to go negative. Again, pretty decent verification this past few days. So again, I'm okay with taking that as a colder signal for the west, warmer signal for the east. I'll do the EPO. EPO's forecast to go negative. Haven't really had too many verifications, but it seems to have been doing just kind of. I'll zoom in so it's a little easier to see. Looks like it's been doing decent, I guess. Just kind of eyeballing that during last 10 days, May 10th to around May 20th area. So again, I'm okay with taking the negative EPO, which is the reason I increased the spread due to the negative EPO, which I believe is still a cool signal for the eastern part of the country this time of year. And last but not least, I have the CPC painting a broad warm picture across most of the demand areas, the South mainly, especially Florida, Texas. Although it's interesting that seems to be a little bubble of cooler air, which I could see pushing its way down into maybe into Iowa and Illinois, maybe even based off this equal chance and kind of how this pattern looks set up. So there's a little bit of risk there as well. Just kind of tossing out here that there appears to be above average precipitation in the south, which could also hurt HDDs. I believe that's how that's TDDs. I believe that's how, um, that'll cap the highs for the day. Just and let's see, and yeah, so that's my forecast. Any questions, comments, complaints, concerns? Okay. If you come up with any questions, you can ask me at any time.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I have maybe how much time we have? Like 20 minutes? 19 minutes? Up to 19? I mean, I would say, can you just like give me again, if you had a minute, can you just do it one more time? But like, let's say a minute. Give me the most important information I need to know in a minute.
Yeah.
If you don't want. All right, go ahead.
All right. So my forecast was for 36 CDDs with a slightly above average spread of 8, as compared to the 10-year. The main drivers of the forecast: positive NAO, positive AO, so looking like with a negative PNA, so looking like a warmer east. The CPC broadly agrees with this, with some warmth up along the east coast and along most of the south, so supporting a warmer than average forecast. And the only risk I can see to the forecast would be a negative EPO, which is forecast, but we'll see how that turns out, because the EPO forecasts, while they have been decent the past 10 days, need a little bit more time in the CDD season to see if it will maintain that accuracy. So overall, 36 HDD, slightly warmer than the 10-year.
So I thought that was very good. The one critique I would have is at the end where try to and these things are hard, right? And it's easy for me to critique. But at the end where like you gave a good account in saying this is my forecast, very clear and concise. These are the data points that are driving my forecast, CPC, or you mentioned CPC as being consistent. Um, when you got to the EPO, you said there's the only risk I see is the EPO, and then you said we'll see how that works out. That to me is I'm trying to think the best way to put it. Um, that I think there's better ways to put it, right? I'm trying to be politically correct, right? We'll see how that works out. I'm an end user. What does that mean? Like, what do you mean we'll see how that works out? Doesn't make you feel better. What I want to know is how did you incorporate that into your forecast? How did you incorporate that risk? So I think you were almost there, and then you kind of went off to one of these. Oh, we'll see how it goes. You know what?
Yeah.
You know what I
Yes.
mean? It's like,
I see what you mean. I see what you mean.
yeah. So I think saying something like the EPO does present some cool, and I'm using my own words or whatever, but the EPO does provide some cool risk, and I attempted to bake that into my spread.
That's actually what I did. So.
Yeah, and that's what I thought you did, and that's what I think you were originally trying to say, but then you got back into, and I know this is just nature, to kind of say, well, who knows, really. It's understood. The who knows is what you're saying. It's just you're trying to say it more scientifically and more so that the end user knows that you accounted for it the best way you could. Understanding that yes, there's risk. That 8, or where's your number? 8. That is the risk, right? You're saying it, so you don't have to do one of these. I don't know. The I don't know is there. Don't say the I don't know, because it just makes you sound less credible. It makes you sound like you didn't know what to do, and you did know what to do. So that was the only thing I would say. The next time you do it, try to account for that. And in a situation where you really thought I don't think this is this situation, but in a situation where you really had low confidence about the EPO, instead of saying like, you would just say, the reason my spread is, let's say it was 12, is reflected in the fact that I think this EPO is very uncertain and it could really swing the forecast. That's all you have to say, right? And but other than that, I thought it was really good.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Cool.
All right. Anyone else have any comments, complaints, thoughts, concerns about my forecast? Maybe something else. If not, we will move to the next person. And if no one wants to volunteer, I will randomly select someone based on their.
Okay.
Phil,
So
go
Well,
ahead.
if you don't mind, try to follow this like do like the 2-minute drill. You got to
okay.
get the client the most important information, so on and so forth.
All right. Let's go. So my forecast is 33.4 CDDs with a spread of 8.3, and that is above the 30-year normal in terms of CDDs. And if you look at my weightings, looking at the CPC outlook, as was already mentioned, we have the warm in the southeast and the warm in the southwest. Looking at our tropical conditions, it looks like the MJO signal it looks like the MJF signal will propagate into about phase 8 or possibly decay, and that ends up being as a cool signal, which disagrees with our MJO analog. So putting everything together, the MJO was a slightly warm signal. As was mentioned, the teleconnections, it appears that I treated them as a slightly warm signal also. And then finally, looking at our models, we note that the EC and the CFS both don't really show a very clear 500 millibar height pattern, although it looks like maybe some weak positive heights. And finally, for my confidence, I had lower confidence because the signals were a little weaker, but then that was balanced by higher confidence from the climate signal. So putting everything together, I maintained a spread of 8.3.
I like that last sentence, that last point you make. I thought that was well said. How you ended up with whatever normal confidence because a couple data points were above and below. That's a nice way to put it. Can we see? Can you scroll up a little bit, Michael, just so we can see Phillips?
Yeah.
Yeah. So 33.4. So you're right a little bit above. Okay. How did Philip? You mentioned you briefly, but you mentioned something about the 500 millibar pattern, like it being how does that factor into your forecast, your final number?
That one mostly is just a pattern recognition thing. So that's just sort of like for me, that's sort of a sanity check on whatever the EC and the CFS is spitting out to make sure that whatever temperatures they're spitting out is consistent with the height pattern. So that I don't exactly use that much in terms of my forecast. It's just when I'm looking at the models to give me a sense of what's going on.
Okay. So I think if I understand you correctly, I'm with my client hat on. So I should take that as that the model numbers are reasonable based on the pattern, because in some cases, Philip, you may see a situation where you have a number that doesn't seem to line up with the pattern. And in those situations, that might be reflected by your forecast spread. Well, it might be reflected in your spread, where maybe you alter your spread because you see some weird inconsistency between the forecast output and the pattern and the actual, HDD or CDD numbers.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I get that. That's so it's a sanity check. I think that makes sense anyway, personally.
Any other questions for Phil?
I guess I'll also make a side comment that would be outside the 2-minute spiel, which is, if you probably noticed, my teleconnection numbers sometimes are a little different from Mike's if you read the details, and that's because instead of just using the CPC the CPC numbers, I'm also looking at so if you go on Maxar, they also have teleconnections, which incorporates slightly more models and gives a larger ensemble of possibilities that I look at, which I think may or may not help the forecast, but it does give a larger sense of spread.
That was actually going to be a question I was about to ask you, Phil, and both Mike. Because the teleconnection numbers that I was getting were looking towards more of a negative or neutral, and not so much of a positive. And I was just wondering where you guys were getting yours, because you both said that yours were positive or leaning towards positive.
I think my final numbers was, let's see, I have AO and PNA shifting from positive to neutral / negative, and I have the NAO projected to remain neutral to negative with a very uncertain EPO forecast.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting. I was using the Maxar website as well for that.
Yeah, I use the CPC website. It's what I'm more used to using this. So I just stick with it. I knew this was here. I even played around with this at one point. But I wasn't sure if there was an actual difference. I mean, they have more models, so I guess that makes. So I guess that's why Phil's forecast is always better than mine.
Well, it gives like 2 extra days or something like that. It's not really much more, but it goes out a little bit further.
Yeah, this looks like June 3rd versus June 1st, probably. Oops. Plus, you get the EC, which again doesn't go out as far, but
yeah, that's true. And then, so I incorporated the MJO, but I had the MJO in the first, possibly moving to second phase for the prediction time period. Philip, you were saying it's in the 8th phase. I just wanted to know if I'm reading it incorrectly.
I was looking at a comparison of I think, yeah, if you do operational real time, I think it has all the models. So
yeah.
looking at like doing a really quick eyeballing, it looks like the models are, this looks a little, okay, yeah. Some of the models have it a little slower, some of them have it a little faster. So, and then some of them have it in the null phase. So I was using 8 as my ballpark. Although, since I think in the past, now, once again, I don't really have numbers to support it, but I think in the past it was mentioned that some of the models are a little too fast in propagating the signal. And to me, going from phase 3 to phase 8 in 3 weeks seems a little fast.
That's true. Okay.
Just tossing out here as a kind of a side. I don't know what the J-Man is doing. It seems to be completely in left field. But all right. So if no one has any more questions for Phil, we've got 2 more victims. I mean, contestants. Who'd like to go next?
I guess I'll put mine on if nobody else.
All right. Do you want me to pull up any of this?
You can. It's kind of about the same thing. So this time I went 50% of it. What was that? So the EC I used for 50%. It predicted about, or it's predicting about west of the Rockies being above average. It doesn't really have anything on the East Coast. So to balance that, the CPC had both the East Coast and West Coast on above average, but I gave CPC a slightly lower percentage of 15%, because the moisture content for the above average rainfall was going to be higher on the East Coast, primarily Florida to North Carolina. And then I used 25% for the 10-year moving. Seems to be following more of a trend, just warmer temperatures in general for the 10 years. And then the MJO, which I had in the first phase, I accounted for 10%. And then I had a pretty high sigma of 8.5. And that's mostly just because I don't feel that confident about it.
So Sean, and I think you need to click on Sean's read more just to update. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, this is.
I think that might be from a different one.
It's the one further down.
Oh, I thought this was my bad.
There you go. But So Sean, that last comment, I'll start there. You have lower confidence, kind of, it sounds almost like a gut feeling. Can you elaborate a little bit? Why low confidence?
Well, looking at it now, and I didn't realize putting it in at the time, it's the same exact as the CFS, which is not been proven to be confident. But I don't know. I thought that I would. It seems like everybody's favoring, and including Maxar, is favoring a higher number. While I weighed the EC pretty heavily, which is favoring a lower number. Actually lower than the average. So that's why I felt like maybe I'm doing something wrong. But looking at the EC, it seems like it is taking some other environmental factors into account that the CPC or other models wouldn't necessarily. And then I also was incorporating the telecommunications or teleconnections around neutral as a factor in the EC having a more accurate output. I'm not sure if that's all correct. These are kind of just assumptions I'm making by removing some of the environmental variabilities from it.
Okay. Yeah, and I think it's, I think it's interesting how I think, well, I mean, I think you guys alluded to this, how like, you can interpret teleconnections differently. And I think, obviously, like Philip has some, teleconnection interpretation, and you do. As we think about it, we should probably continue to think about trying to even refine that further. I mean, and what I mean by that is just, saying 15%. Is it, it's a little bit subjective. And if we could come up with like almost like an MJO input, or like equivalent of the MJO input, like where we're able to figure out a way to turn the AO, NAO, PNA subjective interpretation that we're doing, and I do it too, into a little bit more of an objective kind of framework. I think that would be a really cool step. Again, very analogous to the MJO. And by that, I mean, for folks who don't recall or are new to it, and we had a lot of help from Dr. Decker on this, but basically we said, how are people interpreting because a lot of folks would say, I'm putting 30% weight on the MJO. And we would say, well, what does that mean? And it turned out at least one of the ways, not the only way, but one of the ways people were incorporating MJO was by saying, all right, and I'm just making this up, but let's say it was in phase 2 today. They were saying, well, it's in phase 2 today, and 20 days later, 60 and 20 days later, that usually means a warm signal. That is a warm signal 70% of the time. That's probably a better way to put it. And so we were saying, well, let's actually model that, right? And create an algorithm around that. And that's what we did, and that's effectively what it does. So the way that MJO input today is computed, that's in there where it says wherever it is, MJO analog 1. It basically says, where's the MJO today? It finds that, right? We're objectively able to do that, and then it selects a bunch of analogs around it, so surrounding data points. So there's like a perimeter, a circle around it, and somewhat arbitrary. But let's say it's it's like one standard deviation band around that point, and it takes all those analogs, whatever fits within that mask, that circle, and then it takes the average of the CDD or HDD 16, 20 days in the future. So if there's 10 points that are within that analog circuit, and they all average plus 2 CDDs 16 and 20 days from now, that becomes our analog forecast. So anyway, not that it's not maybe trivial, but we could apply someone could try to apply a methodology or a method, a process similar to what we did there with one of the teleconnections, just to see if we can, better get a better handle on exactly what these AO, NAO, PNA teleconnections are projecting 16 to 20 days from now. Just an idea.
I think that'd be interesting to see, just because I know at least 3 of us use the teleconnections in some way. So I think it'd be interesting to see how the numbers we come up with individually, based off the teleconnections, would differ from, say, something like a teleconnection analog 1 forecast.
Right. And if someone is interested in that in the future, I know we have to run, but God, sometimes you forget. But I just remember too, we did develop some of those phase diagrams, right, for other teleconnections. I totally forgot about that because we haven't shared those in a while. But there are these phase diagrams that I think we did for NAO and a couple of the teleconnections. That is one step in that direction, right? It's not the final number, but what we did, remember, we had like an MJO phase diagram, but then we well, we did it for the MJO, but I think we did something similar for like NAO and AO, where you could just say, based on where the NAO AO is, what is it? What would the expected anomaly be? So it's getting close. It's not quite there, but something for the future, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So
One other thing. So since right now we don't have that yet, so what I've been doing, if you click on my read more, so I found on the CPC they do have a temperature map associated with the NAO and PNA, and that's been done by season. So although it obviously is a very rough translation to HDDs and CDDs, I did find that a little helpful in interpreting the teleconnections, especially during the summer, where some of the teleconnection interpretations are different compared to what they are in the winter. Yeah, these things. So there's a PNA one, and then if you read, and then since I can't fit that many links, I did also put it in my strategy. At the bottom of my strategy, I have a link that says NAO. Yeah, this one. And notice how in July we have this is for positive NAO. We have a cool signal in the southeast. While say in January and April, you see that dominant warmth for a positive NAO. And then negative NAO would be reversed.
this is really interesting. I didn't know they had this.
Yeah, I think I found this like 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, that's really good.
Gonna have to look at that for next week. All right. So we're about 5 minutes over. So anyone has any last minute comments, complaints, questions, concerns? Speak now or forever hold your peace until next week. Dave, one thing I'll just if we have another light crowd next week, I don't know if we have any special guests coming or whatnot, but since we didn't have time this week, next week if we want to take a look at my Euro research, since we've got the whole, we have 2 heating seasons in now. So if we can look at that next week.
Yeah,
slot
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think maybe we could even kick off with it. So we can, if you're ready to go, we can maybe kick off with like a 10 or 15 minute or something like that, if that's what you're thinking. But yeah, let us know. Let me know before next Tuesday. But I think that'd be a great idea.
No, I'm fine with that.
Cool.
That works for me.
All right, excellent.
Gives me a chance to ramble on. No, I'm kidding. I'll be sure to practice once or twice, maybe 3, 4, or 5. Who knows?
That's great. Cool.
All right. So that seems to be it. Thanks everyone for coming, doing your forecasts, etc. And hope to see you again next week. So bye everyone.
All right.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
coming.
Bye guys.
Bye.